The footage showed a masked figure. The family said they did not recognize who it was. And within hours of that disclosure, the investigation that had already stretched across 3 months took on a different shape entirely. Today is day 88. Nancy Guthrie, the 79-year-old mother of a nationally known television personality, has been missing from the Tucson, Arizona area since early February 2026. What began as a missing persons case has now become something considerably more complex. The FBI has released a formal description of a masked suspect captured on footage at Nancy Guthrie's home. The reward for information has been increased to $100,000 by federal investigators, and separately, her family has announced a reward of $1 million for her recovery. A SWAT team has conducted a raid on a property in connection with the search. A man was detained near the Mexican border. Hair evidence described as potentially critical has been recovered from inside her home. And a forensic psychologist has publicly argued that the crime scene itself may have been deliberately arranged to mislead investigators. Each of those developments on its own would represent a significant turn in any missing persons case. Taken together on the same day, they represent something the investigation has not produced before: the visible acceleration of a case that many feared was losing momentum. The question now is not whether the investigation is moving. It clearly is. The question is whether it is moving toward the right answers fast enough and in the right direction. 90 days is a threshold in missing persons investigations. It carries weight not because of any official designation, but because of what experience has shown about cases that reach it without resolution. Some of those cases resolve shortly after. Some do not resolve for years. The difference, in most instances, comes down to whether investigators have been building the right case or chasing the wrong leads. What is now visible in the Nancy Guthrie investigation suggests that investigators have been building the FBI suspect description, the evidence recovered from her home, the SWAT operation, and the detention near the border are not the actions of an investigation that is stalled. They are the actions of an investigation that has been moving carefully and has now reached a point where those movements are becoming visible to the outside world. This report covers every significant development from today, traces the investigative arc that produced them, and examines what each piece of information tells us about where this case is headed and what it still does not answer. Start with what the FBI released, because it is the development that changes the fundamental nature of how this case is being discussed. According to available reporting, the FBI has released a description of a masked suspect seen at Nancy Guthrie's home in connection with her disappearance. This is not a description based on speculation or public theory. It is an official suspect profile drawn from evidence, specifically from footage that investigators have been analyzing. The description indicates that a masked individual was present at her home. The Guthrie family, according to reporting, has reviewed the footage and stated publicly that they do not recognize the figure. That family statement is significant in both directions. It eliminates certain possibilities about who the masked individual might be. It also opens a line of investigation pointing towards someone outside the family's circle of direct recognition, a person who was unknown to the family, or who was disguised effectively enough to avoid recognition, represents a specific category of suspect. That category includes strangers, as well as individuals who may have had some peripheral connection, but who would not be immediately identifiable to family members reviewing footage. The FBI simultaneously increased the reward for information related to the case to $100,000. Reward increases of this nature, made at the federal level, serve multiple investigative functions. They generate new tips. They encourage people on the margins of relevant information to come forward. And they signal that the investigation has reached a point where additional information is being actively sought, suggesting there are gaps in the existing evidence that outside information could fill. The Guthrie family's separate announcement of a $1 million reward for Nancy Guthrie's recovery elevates the financial incentive to a level that draws national attention. Rewards at this scale are rare. They reflect both the depth of the family's resources and the depth of their desperation. They also create a dynamic that investigators must manage carefully. Large public rewards generate a significant volume of tips, most of which are not actionable. Processing that volume while maintaining the integrity of active investigative leads requires considerable resource allocation. The FBI also released what reporting has described as new details on the suspect in the alleged kidnapping. The specific contents of those details have not been fully disclosed in available public reporting, but the nature of the releases, a description followed by additional details, suggests a deliberate sequencing of information. Investigators are releasing what they want the public to know, in the order and at the pace that serves the investigation. That deliberate sequencing is itself informative. It suggests the FBI has more information than it has released and is managing the disclosure strategically. The masked intruder footage has also been connected to a separate analytical thread involving what has been reported as a moon phase theory. According to available reporting, some analysis has noted the lunar conditions at the time of the disappearance as potentially relevant to timing or methodology. This kind of environmental detail, while it may appear unconventional, has been part of behavioral analysis in prior cases, where suspects selected timing based on visibility conditions. Whether this specific thread is being taken seriously by investigators, or whether it represents the kind of peripheral theory that emerges in high visibility cases, is not possible to assess from available information. It has, however, entered the public record. The SWAT operation represents the most dramatic visible escalation in the investigation, and it warrants careful examination. According to available reporting, law enforcement conducted a SWAT raid on a property connected to the search for Nancy Guthrie. During that operation, a man and a woman were removed from the home. The specific location of the property, the identity of the individuals, and the legal basis for the search have not been fully detailed in available public reporting. What is known is that it was an organized tactical operation involving specialized law enforcement personnel. SWAT operations in the context of missing persons investigations are not conducted casually. The decision to deploy a tactical team rather than execute a standard search warrant requires a specific evidentiary and risk threshold. It implies that investigators had reason to believe the situation at that property carried a level of danger, urgency, or containment necessity that standard enforcement could not address safely. This could reflect concerns about evidence destruction, the presence of individuals believed to be armed, or intelligence, suggesting that the situation at the location was time-sensitive. The detention of a man near the Mexican border adds a geographic dimension to the case that had not previously been prominent in public reporting. According to available information, an individual was detained in proximity to the border in connection with the Nancy Guthrie investigation. His mother-in-law has publicly stated that he is innocent, according to reporting. That kind of family statement made publicly during an active investigation reflects both the personal conviction of those who know the individual and the pressure that detention creates on those surrounding the detained person. The proximity to the Mexican border raises questions about the potential geographic scope of the investigation. If the investigation has leads pointing toward movement across or near the border, it introduces cross-jurisdictional complexity, the involvement of additional federal agencies, and potential international dimensions that a standard county-level investigation would not typically handle. Meanwhile, the DNA investigation has taken a new turn. According to available reporting, hired home help employed by Nancy Guthrie have been swabbed for DNA samples. This is a standard investigative procedure when hair or biological material is recovered from a scene. And investigators need to determine what belongs to regular occupants and visitors versus what might represent material left by someone who was not supposed to be present. The fact that home help are being swabbed suggests that investigators have recovered DNA material they cannot yet account for, and they are working to eliminate known individuals from the pool of possible matches. The FBI's discovery of what has been described as potentially critical hair evidence inside Nancy Guthrie's home elevates the forensic dimension of the investigation significantly. Hair evidence, when it includes follicular material, carries nuclear DNA. When it is shed hair without the root, it carries mitochondrial DNA. Both are usable for comparison, though nuclear DNA provides considerably more specificity. The characterization of this evidence as potentially critical by FBI investigators, as reported, suggests that the hair does not obviously belong to anyone with a routine reason to be in the home, or that its location or condition makes it forensically significant beyond its mere presence. The combination of the hair evidence, the DNA swabbing of home help, and the masked suspect footage creates a forensic picture that is actively being constructed. Investigators are working to establish who was in that home, when, and under what circumstances. That kind of systematic elimination and comparison process is painstaking. It is also exactly the kind of work that eventually produces a definitive answer. The connection between the SWAT operation and the border detention deserves its own focused examination, because together they suggest a geographic and operational dimension to this case that has not previously been visible. Tucson, Arizona, where Nancy Guthrie lived, sits roughly 60 miles north of the Mexican border. That proximity is not incidental in a kidnapping investigation that has now produced a border-proximate detention. 60 miles is, in certain operational contexts, a manageable distance for the movement of a person under concealment. It is also a distance that can be covered quickly. particularly if the movement was planned in advance. Investigators working a case with this geographic proximity to an international border operate within a specific set of considerations. Evidence of cross-border intent or of actual cross-border movement activates federal jurisdictional frameworks that go beyond standard missing persons protocol. The Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Protection, and international cooperation mechanisms through the Department of Justice all become relevant when a kidnapping case intersects with border proximity. The fact that a man was detained specifically near the border, as opposed to being detained in Tucson itself or elsewhere in Arizona, suggests that investigators had information pointing them toward that geographic zone. That information could have come from surveillance footage, from financial records, from communication records, or from witness accounts. Whatever its source, it was specific enough to direct enforcement resources to a location near the border rather than to a general search area. The SWAT operation and the border detention may represent two separate operational threads in the investigation. They may also be connected, representing different aspects of a single investigative target. What it confirms is that both occurred and that both are connected to the search for Nancy Guthrie. Understanding the full scope of what investigators have learned in the past 88 days requires acknowledging what is not publicly known. There is an investigation that has been conducted in private with tools and information that have not been disclosed for 3 months. The visible developments of day 88 are the surface expression of that private investigation. They represent the point at which the investigation's internal momentum has become external and observable. The gap between what investigators know and what the public knows is not a failure of transparency in the conventional sense. It is the operational gap between a building case and a confirmed case. When investigators close that gap, the public learns what has been known internally for some time. Day 88 may represent the beginning of that closing process. Two of the most analytically significant claims to emerge from this investigation in recent days come not from law enforcement, but from independent experts. Both deserve serious examination. The first is the staged crime scene theory. A forensic psychologist, according to available reporting, has publicly argued that the evidence at Nancy Guthrie's crime scene is consistent with deliberate staging. The specific claim, as reported, is that the scene may have been arranged to mislead investigators about what actually happened and where. The implication in the reporting is that the scene may have been designed to make it appear that an abduction occurred at a specific location when the actual event or some component of it may have occurred elsewhere. Staged crime scenes are a documented phenomenon in criminal investigation. They appear most commonly in cases where someone with knowledge of the victim and access to the location attempts to manipulate the investigative starting point. The staging is typically designed to redirect suspicion, create a false timeline, or obscure the nature of what actually occurred. A well-staged scene can delay an investigation significantly. It can also paradoxically eventually become evidence itself because staging requires choices, and those choices reflect knowledge that not everyone would have. A forensic psychologist making this claim publicly, based on available reporting about the scene, is operating in the domain of behavioral and scene analysis rather than confirmed forensic fact. The claim is not an official law enforcement finding. It is an expert interpretation that has entered the public record. What makes it notable is not its certainty, but its specificity. The claim is not simply that the scene was unusual. It is that the scene bears specific characteristics consistent with deliberate manipulation. If this theory has any merit, it would reframe several aspects of the investigation. It would shift the question from who took Nancy Guthrie to who had access to her home, and the knowledge to arrange what was left behind in a way designed to control what investigators found first. That is a different kind of suspect profile than an unknown masked intruder from outside her circle. The second expert claim comes from a former FBI agent who has indicated, according to available reporting, that new evidence in the case has the potential to significantly shift public attention and discussion. The framing used in reporting around this commentary avoids the realism filter appropriate to serious analysis. What the underlying point conveys is that investigators have or believe they have evidence that is not yet public, and that when it becomes known, will materially change the conversation. Former FBI agents offering this kind of commentary are typically drawing on pattern recognition from prior cases. When an agent who has seen dozens of investigations reach their critical turning point describes what is developing in this case as potentially significant to public perception, it suggests a familiarity with the investigative arc that informed observers take seriously. There is also the theory, now circulating in available reporting, that the abduction may have been motivated by a specific purpose connected to Savannah Guthrie's public profile. According to reporting, some analysis has pointed toward the possibility that Nancy Guthrie was targeted as a way of reaching or pressuring her daughter. This kind of targeted abduction for leverage or revenge is uncommon, but not without precedent. It introduces a motivational frame that points investigators toward individuals with a specific grievance against Savannah Guthrie rather than towards someone with a direct connection to Nancy herself. If that theory holds any investigative weight, it represents a fundamental reorientation of the suspect field. If you have been following this case, now is the moment to stay close. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next development, because based on everything currently emerging, it may not be far away. There is a version of this case in which everything that has happened in the past several days represents the beginning of its resolution. There is another version in which it represents the beginning of its most difficult chapter. Both are possible from where the investigation currently stands. What is not possible, based on available evidence, is the conclusion that nothing is happening. Something is very clearly happening. A federal agency has released a suspect description. A tactical law enforcement operation has been conducted. Evidence described as potentially critical has been recovered from inside her home. DNA processing is underway, with known individuals being systematically eliminated. A man has been detained near a border. A family has committed $1 million to finding a missing person. These are the actions of a case that has reached an inflection point. The investigation of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance has now produced enough publicly visible activity to support a clearer picture of what investigators are working with. There is a masked individual whose identity is unknown to the family. There is physical evidence recovered from her home that is being compared against known individuals. There is a geographic lead that extends toward the border. There is expert analysis suggesting the initial scene may not represent what actually happened at the location that matters most. What Savannah Guthrie has publicly expressed, according to available reporting, is the weight of a daughter who fears her own visibility may have brought harm to her mother. That kind of burden, the possibility that being known puts someone you love in danger, is not a burden that resolves with information. It resolves only when the person is found and the truth about what happened is established. The investigation has the evidence to move toward that truth. Whether the masked individual in the footage can be identified from the description that has been released, whether the hair evidence recovered from the home produces a DNA match against a specific profile, whether the man detained near the border has a connection that holds up under examination, whether the SWAT operation produced what investigators were looking for. None of those outcomes are confirmed in available reporting. What is confirmed is that each of those threads exists and is being pulled. The neighbors of Nancy Guthrie are scared. According to available reporting, at least one neighbor has expressed concern that whoever took her may still be in the area and may be looking for other targets. That fear is real and grounded. An unsolved abduction in a community leaves everyone in it with an unresolved sense of exposure. The investigation's pace matters not only for Nancy Guthrie's family, but for the community that has lived alongside this case for nearly 3 months. The Sheriff's Department has issued a new message to the public. Federal investigators have released new information. A $1 million reward is now in circulation, and somewhere in the intersection of hair evidence, masked footage, border proximity, and a staged crime scene theory, the answer to what happened to Nancy Guthrie exists. It has not been confirmed publicly. It has not led to a formal charge. But the evidence is building, the investigation is visibly accelerating, and the space between what investigators know and what they have confirmed is narrowing. That narrowing is what resolution looks like before it arrives. No arrest has been made. No charge has been filed. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. Those facts remain on day 88 exactly as they were on day 1. But the distance between now and an answer is not what it was 3 months ago. The dual reward structure now in place in the Nancy Guthrie case, $100,000 from federal investigators and $1 million from the Guthrie family, creates a specific public information environment that investigators must actively manage. A $1 million reward is extraordinary. In the landscape of missing persons cases in the United States, rewards at this level are rare enough to be nationally notable. They function differently from more modest rewards in several important ways. At lower reward thresholds, tips generated tend to come from individuals who have observed something and are weighing a modest personal benefit against the inconvenience or risk of coming forward. At the $1 million level, the incentive structure shifts dramatically. A pool of potential tipsters expands to include individuals who have information that they've previously been withholding for reasons unrelated to incentive, including fear, loyalty to others involved, or uncertainty about the significance of what they know. A $1 million reward also reaches individuals who may be peripheral to the case, but who have observed something that they do not realize is relevant. The reward creates a motivation to reconsider observations that were previously dismissed as unimportant. For investigators, the challenge is the volume this generates. High reward announcements in nationally visible cases can produce thousands of tips within a short period. Processing that volume requires significant resources and careful triage. The risk is that genuinely valuable information, submitted alongside an enormous volume of speculation and misdirection, requires time to surface. That processing time is itself a variable in the investigation's timeline. What the Guthrie family's $1 million commitment represents beyond its investigative function is a statement of values. It says, in the most direct financial language available, that no resource is being held back, that the family is not treating the investigation as someone else's responsibility, that the commitment to finding Nancy Guthrie extends as far as the family's capacity to extend it. That statement matters, not only for the investigation, but for the public record of how this family has responded to one of the worst things that can happen to any family. The resurfacing of Sheriff Chris Nanos's past controversies during this investigation represents something specific about how high visibility cases interact with institutional accountability. Law enforcement officials are not immune to scrutiny of their prior records when they are in charge of investigations that attract national attention. Their prior handling of cases, their department's record, any prior findings of misconduct or controversy. All of these become points of examination when the public is invested in whether an investigation is being conducted competently and in good faith. Available reporting has referenced past controversies involving Sheriff Nanos without fully detailing their nature in connection with the current case. What the resurfacing of those controversies represents, in the context of the Nancy Guthrie investigation, is the application of retrospective scrutiny. The public, frustrated with the pace of the investigation and hungry for explanations, looks backward at the officials in charge for patterns that might explain present outcomes. Whether the sheriff's prior record has any bearing on the conduct of the Nancy Guthrie investigation is a question that requires access to information that is not publicly available. What can be assessed is that the institutional pressure on his office has been sustained and is now escalating. The combination of a national case, a $1 million family reward, FBI involvement, and now the resurfacing of prior controversy creates an institutional environment that is difficult to operate within without some awareness of the scrutiny. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has continued to issue public messages, which is itself a communication choice. An agency that stopped communicating publicly in a high-visibility case would generate a different and more damaging impression than one that continues to update, even when updates are limited in substantive content. The continued communication reflects an awareness of the institutional context in which this investigation is being conducted. The new message from the department, as reported, did not resolve any of the outstanding questions about the investigation's direction, but its existence confirms that the department is still present in the public communication around this case, still acknowledging that public engagement is a responsibility of the agency conducting the investigation. What that ongoing engagement produces, if anything, in terms of new tips or community cooperation remains to be seen. What it prevents, at minimum, is the complete retreat from public accountability that would generate its own form of community distrust.